The Galactic Council had watched Earth for over 3,000 years. They had sent probes. They had collected data. They had studied every corner of that terrible blue planet spinning in the outer arm of the Milky Way galaxy. Every species in the Council agreed on one simple fact. Earth was a death trap. Nothing intelligent could ever come from such a place. The planet had gravity that would crush the bones of most sentient beings. The atmosphere was filled with oxygen, a gas so reactive that it could burn through metal over time. The weather systems were violent beyond reason. Hurricanes tore across the oceans. Earthquakes split the ground open without warning. Volcanoes erupted and buried entire regions under ash and fire. The temperature swings were extreme enough to kill unprepared travelers within hours. And then there were the creatures. Earth was filled with predators. Animals with claws and teeth hunted other animals. Tiny organisms invisible to the eye could invade a body and destroy it from within. Even the plants on Earth had developed poisons and thorns to defend themselves. The Council's scientists classified Earth as a Class 12. The scale only went up to 10. They had to create a new category just for that one planet. So when the long-range sensors detected radio signals coming from Earth 200 years ago, Ambassador of the Confederacy refused to believe the data. He checked the readings himself. He ran the numbers 3 times. The signals were real. Something on that hellish world had developed technology. Something had survived long enough to reach for the stars. The Council watched and waited. They observed as the humans, as these creatures called themselves, crawled off their deadly world and began exploring their solar system. The Council members were horrified and fascinated in equal measure. The humans built ships that could withstand forces no Council vessel was designed to handle. They created engines that burned with furious power. They wore suits that protected them from the vacuum of space as casually as one might wear a coat against rain. Commander Daniel Hayes remembered the day everything changed. He stood on the bridge of the UES Horizon, a medium-sized exploration vessel currently orbiting Mars. Daniel was 43 years old with broad shoulders and a calm voice that his crew had learned to trust over 15 years of service. His hair had started going gray at the temples. The lines on his face told stories of long missions and hard decisions. He loved his ship. He loved his crew. He had never expected to be part of first contact with alien life. Lieutenant Morgan sat at the communications station. She was 29 years old with quick hands and an even quicker mind. Her job was to manage all incoming and outgoing signals for the horizon. On that particular Tuesday morning, she noticed something strange in the data stream. A signal was coming from outside the solar system. It was not random noise. It was structured. It was intentional. Someone out there was trying to talk to them. His voice was steady when she spoke, but Daniel could see her hands shaking. She told him they were receiving a transmission from an unknown source approximately 4 light-years away. She said the signal contained linguistic patterns consistent with intelligent communication. Daniel walked to her station and looked at the data himself. His heart was pounding, but his face showed nothing. He had trained for this. Every commander in the fleet had trained for the possibility of alien contact. None of them had truly believed it would happen during their lifetime. He ordered to begin translation protocols and notify Earth Command immediately. The response from the aliens came faster than anyone expected. Within 6 hours, a ship appeared at the edge of the solar system. It was elegant and strange, built from materials that human scientists could not identify. The vessel looked almost fragile, like it was made of glass and light. It approached slowly, carefully, as if afraid of startling the humans. Ambassador transported aboard the Horizon 3 hours later. Daniel had prepared his crew for many possibilities, but nothing could have them for the reality of the alien standing in their cargo bay. It was small, barely 4 feet tall, with pale translucent skin that showed the faint movement of organs beneath. His eyes were large and dark, designed for the dim light of his home world. He wore robes of shimmering fabric, and his movements were slow and deliberate. Daniel stepped forward and extended his hand in the traditional human greeting. He had practiced words of welcome in his mind. He wanted this moment to be perfect. Humanity's first meeting with another intelligent species deserved nothing less. Flinched away from the offered hand. His dark eyes went wide with what could only be fear. Daniel stopped moving immediately. He realized something was wrong. He kept his hand still and his voice soft as he welcomed the ambassador aboard the Horizon. The translator device War took a moment to process the words. When he finally understood, some of the tension left his small body. He apologized for his reaction. He explained that he had read the reports on human physiology. He knew that human muscles were denser than any species in the Council. He knew that human bones were reinforced with calcium in ways that seemed almost military. He knew that the average human could crush the hand of a without meaning to cause harm. Daniel lowered his hand slowly. He assured the ambassador that no one on this ship would hurt him. He said they were explorers, not warriors. Made a sound that the translator interpreted as nervous laughter. He said he believed the commander. He explained that was not why he was here. He told Daniel that the galaxy was in terrible danger. His people needed help. The Council needed help. They needed the humans. Looked up from her station. She had been monitoring communications from the alien vessel. Her face had gone pale. She told Daniel that she was receiving data packets from the ambassador's ship. She said the information described some kind of threat. She said there were images of destroyed worlds and dead civilizations. She said whatever was out there had killed billions. Daniel looked at the small alien standing in his cargo bay. He saw the fear in those large dark eyes. He understood that something had driven this gentle creature to seek help from the most dangerous species the galaxy had ever documented. He asked what was happening out there. The ambassador's voice was barely a whisper when he answered. He said the devourer swarm had returned. He said they consumed everything in their path. He said the council had no warriors. They had evolved beyond violence thousands of years ago. They had no one who could fight. He looked up at Daniel with desperate hope in his eyes. He said they needed the emergency session of the Galactic Council took place on a world called Prime. It was a beautiful planet made of crystal formations that caught the light of 3 suns and scattered rainbows across the sky. 17 different species had sent representatives to this meeting. They gathered in a great hall carved from a single massive crystal, their voices echoing off walls that had stood for 10,000 years. Ambassador stood at the center of the chamber. Holographic displays floated around him showing images that made the assembled delegates tremble. The devourer swarm had emerged from the dark spaces between galaxies. No one knew where they came from. No one knew what they truly wanted. All anyone knew was that they consumed. They ate planets. They ate ships. They ate every living thing in their path and then moved on to find more. The swarm had been defeated once, 10,000 years ago, by a coalition of species that had long since vanished from the galaxy. The records of that ancient war were incomplete. The Council had believed the swarm was gone forever. They had been wrong. A's proposal was simple but terrifying. He wanted to ask the humans for help. High Counselor rose from his seat. He was a sorrel, a species that walked on 6 thin legs and communicated through patterns of bioluminescent light that flickered across his body. His lights flashed red with anger as he spoke. He declared that they could not be trusted. He reminded the Council that humans had only achieved space travel 2 centuries ago. He said they were violent and unpredictable. He insisted that inviting them into Council space would be like releasing wild predators into a nursery. Several delegates murmured their agreement. The reputation of humanity had spread throughout the galaxy. Stories of human history had horrified Council species. The wars, the weapons, the seemingly endless capacity for destruction that humans had turned against each other for thousands of years. Many delegates secretly believed that humanity was more dangerous than the swarm itself. Senator L of the Depth spoke next. Her species lived in the deep oceans of a water world, and she attended the council through a hovering sphere filled with liquid. Her voice came through speakers built into the sphere, soft and flowing like a gentle stream. She acknowledged the concerns about humans. She admitted they were dangerous, but she had studied their ship specifications. She had reviewed their technology. She said human vessels were built to survive conditions that would destroy any council ship instantly. She said human bodies could endure temperatures and pressures that would kill any delegate in this chamber. She asked who else could possibly stand against the swarm. The debate continued for hours. Delegates argued back and forth. Some demanded military research to develop their own weapons. Others suggested abandoning entire sectors of space to slow the swarm's advance. A few quietly proposed surrender, offering resources to the swarm in hopes of being consumed last. Then the feed from Sanctuary Bay went dark. Sanctuary Bay was a colony world. 40 million people lived there, families, children, artists and teachers and farmers who had never harmed anyone. The swarm arrived without warning. The defense satellites lasted 8 seconds. The evacuation ships never made it off the ground. The final transmission showed a sky filled with writhing shapes, millions of creatures descending like a living storm. Then there was only static. High Counselor Subjections died in his throat. His lights flickered through colors that had no translation, but every delegate understood the meaning. Horror, grief, defeat. The vote was unanimous. The Council would contact Earth. Commander Daniel Hayes received the transmission while the Horizon was still in orbit around Mars. He had spent the past week in constant communication with Earth Command, briefing officials on his meeting with Ambassador. The governments of Earth were struggling to process the reality of alien life. Now they would have to process something far more difficult. Morgan translated the message with trembling hands. Her voice cracked as she told Daniel what the Council was asking. They wanted soldiers. They wanted warriors. The entire galaxy was begging humanity to fight their war for them. Daniel read through the data files attached to the message. He saw images of the swarm creatures that looked like nightmares given physical form, chitinous bodies covered in spines and blades, mouths filled with teeth designed to tear through metal, eyes that showed no intelligence, only hunger. These things did not negotiate. They did not reason. They simply consumed. He opened a channel to Earth Command and requested immediate connection to the Joint Chiefs of Staff. The response from humanity was faster than anyone in the galaxy expected. Within 3 months, the United Earth government had formed a coalition of every major nation. Old enemies put aside ancient grievances. Resources were pooled. Factories that had been building civilian vessels were converted to military production. Training programs that had been mothballed for decades were reactivated. Within 6 months, the United Earth Fleet was ready to deploy. 12,000 warships crewed by 2 million soldiers. Every single one of them was a product of evolution's testing ground. Their ancestors had survived ice ages and plagues. They had fought predators with nothing but sharpened sticks. They had crawled out of the mud and reached for the stars through sheer stubborn refusal to die. Admiral Cole stood on the bridge of the UES Defiance, the largest warship humanity had ever built. He was a compact man in his early 50s with sharp eyes that missed nothing. His reputation for unconventional tactics had made him the obvious choice to lead this mission. His executive officer, Commander Wright, handed him the latest intelligence reports on her tablet. She was 10 years younger than him with red hair cut short, and a mind that could calculate firing solutions faster than most computers. She told him the swarm had consumed 18 star systems in the past month. The Council species were evacuating their core worlds. They were running out of places to hide. She said the reports indicated that nothing had ever successfully fought back against the swarm. Looked at the tactical display showing the fleet arranged around his flagship. 12,000 ships filled with humans who had volunteered for a war against creatures from their darkest nightmares. Not one of them had been forced. Not one of them had been threatened or bribed. They had heard that innocent people were dying, and they had simply shown up ready to fight. He thought about what the aliens believed about humanity. The Council saw humans as dangerous primitives barely removed from savagery. They were not entirely wrong. Humans were dangerous. They had proven that countless times throughout their history, but the Council had missed something important. Humans were dangerous because they had to be. Their world had given them no choice. Survival on Earth required strength and speed and the willingness to fight against impossible odds. Those traits had been carved into human DNA over millions of years of brutal natural selection. Now those traits would be turned against the swarm. Smiled at, it was not a pleasant smile. It was the smile of a predator about to hunt. He told her the swarm was about to get an education. The devourer swarm arrived at prime on what humans would call a Tuesday. The crystal world had become the last major stronghold of the Galactic Council. Refugee ships from 100 conquered systems had gathered here, carrying survivors who had nowhere else to go. The Council had assembled every vessel they could find to defend this place. 4,000 ships formed a protective barrier around the planet, their gentle crews praying to whatever gods they believed in. The swarm came like a dark cloud spreading across the stars. 300 million individual organisms, each one a living weapon shaped by evolution for a single purpose. They moved in perfect coordination, a billion tons of chitinous horror guided by a single terrible intelligence. When they saw the Council's defense fleet, they did not slow down. They did not hesitate. They simply attacked. The battle lasted 11 minutes. Council ships were designed for peace. Their weapons were meant to deflect asteroids and clear debris from shipping lanes. Their pilots had never trained for combat. They flew in straight lines. They fired in predictable patterns. They died by the thousands. Admiral Cole watched the massacre from the edge of the system. The human fleet had arrived just minutes before the swarm. They had barely finished their faster-than-light transition when the attack began. Stood on the bridge of the UES Defiance with his hands clasped behind his back and his jaw tight with barely controlled anger. He had seen terrible things during his career. He had never seen anything like this. Commander Wright was already calculating engagement vectors. Her voice was steady, but her eyes burned with cold fury. She reported that Council vessels were not even attempting evasive maneuvers. She asked what they were doing out there. Told her they did not know how to fight. He explained that their species had not fought a war in 12,000 years. They had forgotten that violence was even possible. Now they were paying for that ignorance with their lives. The last Council ship exploded in a flash of light. The swarm turned its attention to the planet below. Millions of creatures began their descent through the atmosphere, falling toward the cities filled with refugees who had nowhere left to run. Gave the order. The human fleet accelerated at full burn, pushing their engines beyond safe limits. The crew of the Defiance felt the force of acceleration press them into their seats. It was uncomfortable, but nothing more. Their bodies had evolved under Earth's crushing gravity. Forces that would have killed Council pilots barely made humans sweat. The swarm detected the new arrivals and pivoted. Something in that collective intelligence recognized a threat. For the first time in 10,000 years, the swarm encountered prey that did not run. Lieutenant Park sat at the weapons station, his fingers hovering over the firing controls. He was 26 years old, born and raised in Seoul before joining the fleet. His parents had been farmers. His grandparents had survived wars that had nearly destroyed their nation. That survival instinct ran through his blood like fire. He reported target lock on the lead cluster and requested permission to fire. Told him to show them what could do. The human fleet opened fire with everything they had. Plasma cannons designed to cut through asteroids proved devastating against organic matter. The weapons had been built to operate in Earth's corrosive oxygen atmosphere. They could burn at temperatures that would melt Council ship hulls in seconds. When those plasma bolts struck swarm creatures, the results were spectacular. Bodies exploded. Clusters scattered. The darkness of space lit up with the fires of destruction. Kinetic projectiles followed the plasma. Solid slugs of metal accelerated to incredible speeds by magnetic rails. Each projectile struck with the force of a small bomb. Each impact tore through dozens of swarm organisms. The creatures had never encountered weapons like this. Their carapaces could shrug off the feeble attacks of Council ships. They offered no protection against human artillery. Then came the nuclear warheads. The Galactic Council had banned nuclear weapons 15,000 years ago. They considered such devices barbaric. The very idea of weapons that could destroy entire cities filled them with horror. Humans had kept building them anyway. There was dotted with thousands of warheads, remnants of conflicts that had nearly ended their species. Now those weapons found a new purpose. Silent flowers of atomic fire bloomed across the battlefield. Each explosion consumed thousands of swarm creatures. Each flash of light pushed back the darkness that had threatened to consume the galaxy. On the surface of Prime, High Counselor stood at a crystalline viewport and watched the sky burn. He had opposed bringing the humans here. He had called them dangerous primitives. He had warned that they would turn on the Council once the swarm was defeated. Now he watched those primitives tear through the enemy with a ferocity that left him trembling. The humans fought like demons. They flew through swarm formations that would have paralyzed Council pilots with fear. They took hits that would have destroyed any Council vessel and kept fighting. They died by the hundreds and their comrades pressed forward without hesitation. Finally understood something that his species had forgotten long ago. Violence was not always evil. Sometimes it was necessary. Sometimes the only way to protect the innocent was to become the thing that monsters feared. But even demons could be overwhelmed. The swarm was vast. For every creature destroyed, 10 more took its place. The human fleet was pushed back, trading space for time. Ships took damage, crews died. The UES Valor, a destroyer commanded by Captain Mitchell, positioned itself between a swarm cluster and a refugee transport filled with children, ordered his crew to the escape pods. He stayed at the helm himself, pouring fire into the enemy until his ship was torn apart around him. His last transmission was 2 words: "Get them out." Admiral Cole ordered a tactical retreat. The fleet regrouped at the edge of the system, licking their wounds and counting their dead. 37 human ships destroyed, 12,000 soldiers lost, more casualties than humanity had suffered in any single battle in the last century. Stood beside, her face pale and her hands shaking. She had known some of those crews. She had trained with some of those pilots. Now they were gone. She reported their losses in a voice that barely held steady. She said they had killed over 40 million swarm organisms, more than the entire Galactic Council had destroyed in the previous century. But it was not enough. They were still outnumbered 1,000 to 1. Stared at the holographic display showing the swarm regrouping for another assault. The creatures had learned from the first engagement. They were spreading out, making themselves harder targets. They were adapting. He thought about the refugee ships behind him. Millions of innocent people from a dozen species, counting on humanity to save them. He thought about Earth, about his home, about the billions of humans who would be next on the swarm's menu if this mission failed. He told they needed to find another way. They could not win through brute force. They needed to be smarter. They needed to find a weakness. He turned to his crew and ordered them to find him something to kill. The breakthrough came from the xenobiology lab buried deep in the heart of the UES Defiance. Dr. Laura had spent 3 weeks studying a captured swarm organism, the only one ever taken alive. She had dissected dozens of dead specimens. She had analyzed their genetic structure. She had mapped their nervous systems. But the living creature had revealed secrets that the dead could never tell. Laura was a small woman with steady hands and dark eyes that rarely blinked when she was focused. Her parents had immigrated to America from Taiwan before she was born. They had worked double shifts in a restaurant to pay for her education. They had taught her that no problem was too difficult if you refused to give up. She carried that lesson with her into the depths of space. She called Admiral Cole to the lab on a Thursday morning. The creature floated in a containment tank filled with nutrient solution, its body twitching and spasming in patterns that Laura had learned to read. She stood beside the tank with her tablet in hand and a look of exhausted triumph on her face. She told she had found something. She explained that the swarm was not what they thought it was. The individual creatures were not truly intelligent on their own. They were extensions of something larger, something that controlled them all. Looked at the creature in the tank. Up close it was even more horrifying than the images had suggested. A body covered in spines and blades, compound eyes that reflected the light like broken mirrors, jaws that could tear through steel. He asked Laura what she meant. She pulled up a holographic display of brain scans and neural maps. She explained that every swarm organism had the same brain structure. They all shared identical neural patterns. They were not individuals thinking for themselves. They were receivers, picking up signals from a central source. She said there was a queen mind somewhere out there, a single massive intelligence that coordinated every organism in the swarm. Without that guiding intelligence, the creatures would become nothing but mindless animals. Felt something spark in his chest. Hope. He asked Laura if she knew where this queen mind was located. She nodded and brought up a star chart. Her finger pointed to a system deep within swarm-controlled space. She said the signal patterns led back to a single source, a massive organic structure orbiting a dying star. She warned him that it was protected by the highest concentration of swarm organisms they had ever detected. Commander Wright studied the chart with narrowed eyes. She calculated the numbers in her head. She said it was suicide. No fleet could punch through those numbers. They would be destroyed before they got within 1,000,000 kilometers. Agreed, no fleet could survive that approach, but he said perhaps a single ship might. The plan was insane by any rational standard. One vessel would make a stealth approach through swarm territory using experimental cloaking technology that the Council had provided as a gift. The ship would slip past the swarm defenses, reach the Queen Mind and destroy it, hopefully before being torn to pieces. Announced the mission to his crew. He made clear that he was asking for volunteers only. Anyone who wanted to transfer to another ship would face no judgment. This was likely a one-way trip. Not one crew member stepped off the Defiance. Not one request for transfer came through. Every single person on that ship chose to stay. The journey took 3 weeks. 3 weeks of silent running through systems choked with swarm organisms. The cloaking technology bent light and radiation around the ship, making it nearly invisible. But nearly was not perfectly. The crew lived in constant tension, knowing that a single malfunction would bring millions of enemies down on their heads. They ate emergency rations in silence. They slept in shifts, never more than a few hours at a time. They watched the sensors and held their breath every time a swarm cluster passed nearby. Ensign Taylor manned the sensor station for 18 hours each day. He was 22 years old, barely old enough to shave, but his eyes had the focus of a veteran. He had grown up in a small town in Montana where his father had taught him to hunt deer in the mountains. That patience served him well now. He studied the swarm movements like he used to study animal tracks. He found patterns. He found gaps. He guided the Defiance through the darkness like a ghost. On the 19th day, detected something massive. His voice was calm when he reported to the bridge, but his hands were shaking. He told they had found it, the Queen Mind. It was the size of a small moon. Ordered all hands to battle stations. The Defiance dropped its cloak and accelerated toward the target at maximum burn. Every weapon on the ship powered up. Every crew member prepared for the fight of their lives. The swarm reacted instantly. Millions of organisms turned toward the single human vessel that had appeared in their midst. They abandoned their patrol patterns and converged on the Defiance like white blood cells attacking an infection. What followed was a battle that would be remembered for. The Defiance twisted and dove through swarm formations at speeds that would have killed any Council pilot. Lieutenant Park fired weapons in all directions, plasma and kinetic rounds tearing through creatures that got too close. Ensign kept feeding navigation data to the helm, finding paths through the chaos that no computer could have calculated. They took hits, claws tore through hull plating, spines punctured compartments. Crew members died at their stations and their comrades dragged their bodies aside and kept working. Lieutenant Commander Brooks led the Marine detachment in the lower decks. She was a veteran of 3 planetary campaigns, her body marked by scars from wounds that Council species could not have survived. She had been fighting since she was 18 years old. She did not know any other way to live. She gathered her Marines in the boarding bay as the Defiance made its final approach to the Queen Mind. Their orders were simple: get inside, find the central chamber, plant the nuclear device they were carrying, end this war. Looked at her team, 40 soldiers in power armor, every one of them ready to die. She told them nobody lived forever. She told them to move out. They breached the Queen Mind's surface through a wound the Defiance's weapons had carved. Inside was a nightmare landscape of poolsing organic matter and twisting corridors. The walls were alive. The floor shifted beneath their feet. Creatures emerged from every shadow. The Marines fought through corridors that seemed designed to confuse and disorient. They lost soldiers at every junction. Private Martinez was torn apart by a creature that dropped from the ceiling. Sergeant Cole was dragged into a wall and never seen again. Corporal Davis held a doorway alone for 3 minutes so others could advance, firing until his ammunition ran out, and then fighting with his knife until the swarm overwhelmed him. Reached the central chamber alone. Her armor was cracked. Her rifle was empty. Her left arm hung useless at her side, broken in 2 places. She limped through the final passage and found herself in a vast open space filled with bioluminescent light. The Queen Mind manifested before her. It was not a single creature. It was a collection of organic matter shaped into something that resembled a face. A face the size of a building, floating in the center of the chamber, surrounded by tendrils that stretched throughout the entire structure. It spoke directly into his mind, a voice that bypassed her ears and echoed in her thoughts. It told her she was nothing, one small creature from one small world. It said her species was young and weak and alone. It promised that Earth would be consumed. It promised that every human would be devoured. It asked her what she hoped to accomplish. Reached for the pack strapped to her back. Inside was a nuclear warhead powerful enough to vaporize everything within 100 kilometers. She armed the device with her one working hand. She looked up at the vast alien intelligence that had destroyed 1,000 worlds. She told it that Earth did not raise quitters. The Queen Mind tried to stop her. Tendrils shot toward her from every direction. Creatures burst through the walls. The floor itself tried to swallow her. Pressed the detonation trigger. Light consumed everything. The explosion was visible from 3 star systems away. A flash of light brighter than the dying sun the Queen Mind had orbited. Sensors across the galaxy detected the blast. Ships from every species in the Council turned toward that distant point of light and wondered what had happened. Admiral Cole stood on the bridge of the UES Defiance and watched the Queen Mind die. The massive organic structure collapsed in on itself, folding like a flower closing at sunset. Secondary explosions rippled across its surface. Chunks of dead matter spiraled off into space. Within minutes, there was nothing left but debris. Throughout the galaxy, swarm organisms went mad. Watch it happen on his tactical display. The creatures that had been converging on the Defiance suddenly stopped coordinating. Some turned on each other, attacking their fellow swarm members with the same ferocity they had shown toward prey. Others simply drifted, their movements random and purposeless. A few fled into the darkness between stars, running from nothing, driven by instincts that no longer made sense. Commander Wright stood beside, tears running down her face. She whispered that she could not believe it actually worked. Thought about Brooks. He thought about the 40 Marines who had followed her into that nightmare structure. He thought about every crew member who had died to get the Defiance close enough to make the boarding possible. They had given everything. They had saved everyone. He opened a channel to the rest of the human fleet waiting at Prime. He told them the Queen Mind was destroyed. He told them the swarm was broken. He ordered them to finish it. The cleanup took months. Human vessels spread across swarm-controlled space, hunting down the remaining creatures. Without their guiding intelligence, the organisms were dangerous but predictable. They attacked anything that moved, but they no longer worked together. A single human ship could destroy thousands of them. Council species began to assist. Their gentle vessels were not built for combat, but they were perfectly suited for rescue operations. They evacuated survivors from devastated worlds. They provided medical care to wounded humans. They documented the aftermath of battles so future generations would understand what had happened. The war ended not with a single dramatic victory, but with a slow, grinding effort that eliminated the swarm one cluster at a time. The last confirmed swarm organism was destroyed 7 months after the Queen Mind fell. The galaxy was finally safe. The ceremony took place on Prime, in the same crystal chamber where the Galactic Council had first voted to contact Earth. Representatives from 17 species filled the hall. Many of them were survivors of worlds the swarm had touched. All of them owed their lives to the High Counselor stood at the center of the chamber. His bioluminescent patches glowed with colors that humans had learned to read as solemn gratitude. He spoke slowly, his words translated into 100 languages and broadcast across the galaxy. He said he had been wrong about the humans. He admitted that he had called them dangerous. He confessed that he had called them primitives. He acknowledged that he had been terrified of what they might do to the galaxy once the swarm was defeated. He paused and looked at Admiral Cole, who stood among the human delegation with his crew behind him. Said the humans were dangerous. That much was true, but they were also brave and kind and willing to sacrifice everything for people they had never met. He said the Council had judged humanity by what they could do without asking what they would choose to do. He said that was the greatest error his species had ever made. He announced that the Galactic Council was offering humanity a permanent seat, the first species from a ever granted such an honor, the first species ever invited to join the Council after less than 3 centuries of space travel, the first species that the Council had once feared would destroy them all. The chamber erupted in applause and flashing lights and sounds of approval from a dozen different species. Stood still and let the moment wash over him. He thought about everyone who should have been standing here instead. Mitchell, Brooks, the thousands who had died so millions could live. He accepted the honor on behalf of humanity. The months that followed brought changes no one had predicted. Trade agreements opened between Earth and Council worlds. Cultural exchanges began. Human music and art spread across the galaxy. Alien technology and philosophy flowed back toward Earth. 200 years of isolation ended in a flood of connection. Commander Daniel Hayes stood on the observation deck of the rebuilt UES Horizon a year after the war ended. He watched a transport dock with a human orbital station. Humans and aliens walked side by side through the corridors below, talking and laughing and sharing meals together. Ambassador stood beside Daniel. The small alien no longer flinched in the presence of humans. He had spent enough time among them to understand that strength did not always mean violence. Asked Daniel a question that had been bothering him since they first met. He asked how humans survived on Earth. He asked how any species could thrive on a world so determined to kill them. Daniel thought about the question for a long moment. He thought about hurricanes and earthquakes. He thought about predators and plagues. He thought about ice ages that lasted thousands of years and extinction events that wiped out nearly all life on the planet. He thought about all the ways Earth had tried to destroy humanity and all the ways humanity had refused to die. He told her that humans did not have a choice. Their world never gave them one. Every generation had to fight for survival. Every generation had to prove they deserved to exist. That endless struggle had carved strength into human bones. It had planted stubbornness in human hearts. It had taught humanity a lesson that gentle species had never needed to learn. He said when something tried to kill them, they did not run. They fought back. O was silent for a long time. He watched the stars through the viewport. Somewhere out there, on 1,000 different worlds, species that had never known violence were learning about courage from stories of human sacrifice. Species that had never faced adversity were inspired by tales of human resilience. A finally said he was glad humans fought back. He said the galaxy needed them. He said perhaps existed for a reason. Perhaps the universe knew that someday it would need creatures forged in fire and blood to stand against the darkness. Daniel smiled. He told her that he did not know about cosmic purposes. He said humans just did what they had always done. They saw people in trouble and they helped. They saw monsters threatening the innocent and they fought. They saw impossible odds and they refused to accept defeat. He said that was just what did. Across the galaxy, the legend of humanity spread. Parents told their children about the fierce creatures from a deadly world who had saved everything. Teachers taught their students about courage and sacrifice. Leaders studied human tactics and wondered how such a young species had accomplished what ancient civilizations could not. And in the dark spaces between stars, in the cold regions where light rarely reached, any threat that might have risen to challenge the peaceful species of the galaxy thought twice about revealing itself. Because now they were watching. They had earned their place among the stars through blood and fire and stubborn refusal to die. They had proven that the same traits that made them dangerous also made them protectors. They had shown the galaxy that sometimes the most terrifying thing in the universe was also the only thing standing between the innocent and destruction. The aliens of the Galactic Council had expected to find mindless savages on Earth. Instead, they found heroes. And they could only stand in shock at what they had become.